Welcome to the Data Product Management in Action podcast, created and executive produced by me, Scott Hirleman, and brought to you by Soda, your best friend in data quality and contracts tooling. We created this podcast to serve as a place for actual practitioners bringing product management practices to data, whether that is to AI and ML, data products, platforms, or everything else in data, right? And it's to dig into the nitty-gritty of product management in data, but in fun and dynamic conversations. It's not just lift and shift from software product management. We have a great set of hosts for you that are also practitioners, so they can really get into those specifics and dive deep and get you the information you want to know rather than just high level, here is what a data product is. This is about cutting through the noise of data product management to drive towards actionable insights, hence the actual podcast name, Data Product Management in Action. So sit back and enjoy another awesome conversation.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Toland, host of the Data Product Management in Action podcast. And today I am joined by Max Fritzhan, creator of Bolta AI, a social media management platform for the social media system Threads, run by Meta. Max, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome. It's good to be here. So happy, so excited.
Yeah. How about you go ahead and just, share a little bit about your background and sort of how you came to create Bolta and why.
Yeah. So Bolta, it was an evolution that came out from many failed startups. And this was through a tribulation of many trials and lessons, and it came to that. But rewinding, day job, I work as a software engineer at Expansia. It's a contractor with the Air Force. And all this time, I've always felt that I wanted to get out of the rat race and really build something and be independent, have financial freedom. And every day, at night when I would get off of work or just on the weekends, I would always spend time building something. Like one thing I built was a 3D food menu app where you would just scan it in 3D, object, and it would turn it into a food menu item, and you can see it at a restaurant. So I built many projects, and Bolta, it came out about just early July of last year. And I was just showering and it hit me. Why can we not schedule threads? Why? And that problem bugged me so much that I could not, I wasn't able to sleep the rest of the night because I was trying to solve that problem. And I usually like to solve complicated problems in my head, and then I like to draw on a whiteboard. And so I spent the next day thinking, just how can I solve this problem? And I made a very rudimentary version of it that did not connect with the API, did not talk with the server, but it did it on the client side. And that became the first version. And that really was like an oh shit moment. We just created the world's first scheduling app for threads, and we might be onto something. And that is pretty much the genesis in the continuation of how Bolta came to be.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by that because I think it was like an extension to Chrome, correct? Yeah. So I guess, I mean, it was really bootstrappy. I remember, some of the earlier conversations, and I guess before we dive into some of the more technical pieces is why was that the specific challenge that frustrated you so much that you wanted to create your own solution? There's lots of pieces, and I think a lot of folks who build something bespoke, which is why I was excited to talk to you, because I don't get to talk to a lot of data product managers who are building something bespoke. Usually we're working with people internal to corporations who are building out, robust data products. But in this case, this turned it from sort of a frustration to a full-blown platform. So I guess why was this the thing first? They were this just frustrates me to no end.
Right. And as an engineer, I would always build things. And there's a common thing with the engineering is solving the distribution bottleneck, being able to have this product and then market it. And it clicked to me that Bolta is solving that distribution bottleneck for all of my future products that I plan to build out. So when I build, ABC product, I could then leverage the power of Bolta as a marketing tool to intelligently promote my product. And it's not so much an automation, but it's a co-pilot. So as an engineer, I have so much time in a day. So being able to use this power of Bolta, being able to market effortlessly, really allows me to focus more on other products. So I'm able to get back in the trenches and keep building. And it's like a pyramid. Like you build the foundation, then you can build the next one. So maybe I build an accounting software or something and I connect it within Bolta. Like I have everything like intertwined.
Got it. Yeah, that's interesting. And so I think thinking through, I really love this concept of like solving the distribution bottleneck. I don't think I've heard that. I've certainly heard of variations of that when it comes to, marketing consumer products and whatnot, but I was fascinated by just that is a really simple way of articulating it. And so I guess I want to start for those who don't know, they can go to Bolta.ai, but I'm curious, through our pre-chat, you talked through some initial attempts that you took at solving this problem, a kind of over-engineered solution. And I'm curious sort of, how did you start the discovery of those initial approaches and what did you learn from them? And how did you go about learning on how to iterate on that? Because I think in product management, iteration is so important. And I think you're also conversely playing the role of engineer and product manager because you're really a one-person shop at this point.
Right. So instead of thinking like 10x, I thought like level 1. Okay, what are the basic things to build something? And when you think of that, it's just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And you think of it like a Prius. You're driving a Prius and that gets you only so far. You don't have all the horsepower. So I just thought, okay, I just want to build something that can allow me just to move a little bit. And I got there. But then I was like, okay, now I need to add authentication. Next challenge. And then I realized I got to add Firebase. And then I got to think about, okay, do I want to do NoSQL or SQL? Right. And so all of these problems, as I was like overwhelming myself, like, because if I go this way, then it transforms into a Ferrari. But what if I want to go to a Tesla Model S and just be all electric? Right. Like it has its pros and cons. So I really had to think about the architecture early on, and I kept evolving it. Like, 3 or 4 months in, I had this very sophisticated, JavaScript client extension, and I had the authentication of Firebase, and then I was getting ready to refactor it, and then I realized that there's very limited information on extensions, so I was struggling with this one problem, and the problem was around getting information on the actual like web app. So that's called the shadow DOM. So you have the side panel, the pop up, and you have the shadow DOM. So with the Chrome extension, in a way, it's actually two apps. So it's an app that interfaces on the website when you visit it, and it affects the behavior on the client app. And then there's the side panel with the pop-up, and that also is its own thing. So those things, I literally had to buy a book to understand that. And I realized I need to, go beyond JavaScript, and I jumped to TypeScript, and then I went to React. So I started installing all these packages so I can iterate even more quickly. So it came down to just starting early with just, moving the wheels a little bit and then seeing if that worked and moving it. So it was like small iterations.
What was like the first thing that you were trying to make the iteration for? I mean, you said scheduling. You couldn't schedule up on threads, right? And so like you think about that very first iteration of an MVP, right? So you had to solve for authentication because you had to be able to, link it to some sort of threads account that's yours, identify that. So there's some level of like play between the threads authentication layer and then really get that schedule piece of like timing and component where you have to store something and then push it to the API at a certain point. How do you go through and like do the exploration of that design? Particularly, I think when you first started it, there was no official API.
There was none. So when it comes to the algorithm, I've probably built 3 or 4 different various algorithms, and the first one started like an alarm clock. So right when you schedule it, the timer starts. So let's say I started so I want scheduling the next 30 minutes. So 30, like 29, like it just like starts going incremental down. And great in theory, but the way that I had it designed, you had to actually have your computer turned on and you had to be open on like threads. So very counterintuitive to a scheduling app. Because like,
yeah.
Like, why do
very client side?
Right. Like, it makes no sense. Like, so now I was like, okay, maybe I should buy a Raspberry Pi. Maybe I could host it. Maybe, and then because now I have to log in users. And I was thinking all about these things. And I was like, yeah, this is very stupid. Like, very over engineered, and it's not worth the energy. So I was like, okay, there has to be a better way. And I was thinking all about the different algorithms, like through scheduling, because it sounds easy to schedule something. Yeah, just do a cron job, have it check every minute, 2 minute, whatever. But, when you're scheduling a lot of various things, a lot of information all at once, it does take time. And we have lots of different, I like to call them workers, checking different facets of the user. And when think of it like a line, like you're waiting at an amusement park, like, all right, next one, and that person can ride the roller coaster. So it ended up becoming sort of like that algorithm. And then I realized, you know what, we could actually split it up and we could actually make multiple lines. So, and then we could just have, we can basically do 2 scheduled posts at once, 3 scheduled, 4 scheduled at once, right? So I started pushing its limits. And that's really how it became the scheduling. And
got it. And so, I mean, you had this very much on the client side, really, really bootstrapped. There's no sort of like back-end infrastructure. It was the infrastructure that, a basic user had on their client side in their browser. And then as you said, you went to Raspberry Pi, and then I guess then you put it into, I'm assuming, some sort of cloud repository or some sort of service. Like, For those folks who've never done bootstrap software and data engineering to build out a product, like what tool did you use to start like hosting your very first sort of piece that had backend server component that was truly web first and available, where I didn't have to leave my computer on?
Yes. So fortunately, I had a previous company that was like the food company I mentioned, and I spent quite a bit of money on compute, and I had a Mac Studio. So I had a $2,000 machine that was just sitting on the shelf collecting dust. So I used that initially to handle the scheduling, handle the hosting. And then I realized, what if I just wanted to, run it continuously, right? So I shifted gears to having it online. I hosted it online. And there's various platforms out there like Google Cloud, AWS, and I was looking for a good alternative. I found a good website called Render. And so I had this Docker file, and it housed all the Lego blocks, let's call it, all the pieces of what comprised Volta. And that was originally hosted locally on my Mac Studio. And I basically just clicked, a few buttons, and now it's online. And that enabled me to have more peace of mind. So like, what if the power went out, right? Stuff like that, right? Making sure that you always have good internet connection.
I don't think I realized that this was it moved from the client side to like a server you physically owned. For some reason, I thought at one point it just moved to the cloud. That's fascinating because I think a lot of folks don't probably think about all the bootstrapping phases that you can go through to really iterate as you scale, right? Because I mean, this is really a story about scaling a bespoke piece. And then as we'll get to more of the data specific aspects, and the reason, again, I wanted to interview you specifically was about how do you take something from 0 to 1 and start adding in the data components to make like a really compelling, I think, social media engagement tool.
Right.
And so I think then getting to the point of considerations around the fact that you started integrating with an unofficial API, as I understand, and I don't know how much you can share about that, but I'm curious before we dive into sort of the creative lengths that you went to, particularly with starting then to get like more robust user feedback before really designing things on the data integration pieces. What was it like to before they had a true API? Like there was no Threads API that was publicly available to do all this yet. You were well ahead of the curve. I mean, you had found something bespoke.
It was like you're in a jungle and like you just found like a spark of like fire and you're like, oh my God. And like I can like cook the raw meat and like actually have like it was like wow, it was like all the circuits going off. That was that feeling. And really it came down to understanding the legal side too. So as I was reading about all these unofficial APIs, I've noticed that in the past and historically, like those that have done, reverse engineering can get a cease and desist. So I was like, yeah, that's not good. So let's not get a cease and desist from Meta. Let's not do that. So yeah, so I thought, you know what? We would only get a cease and desist if we publicize it, right? If we make it private and if we just keep building, and we just really build a modular platform using this existing knowledge that's out there, I think everything will be fine. We just don't really publish it. So this earlier version that I was describing, that was never published. That was more so alpha, showing individuals at, the tech threads events. And really the official API when that threads came out in July. So like 1 year later, that was like really when we did launch it. Like that's like when we like clicked like the okay, green light, boom. So before that, it was very local and it was inviting people to test it. But before the early, like, the age right around there, to get access to threads, you would have to give your username and password. And then in exchange, you would get a token, like a key to the kingdom. And then this token, you can then use this to essentially publish posts, reply. You can basically do everything that normally can do on the API. You just don't need a secret key. So that is a huge security vulnerability. And I'm like, okay, we are not publishing this at all because it violates GDPR policies. And I don't want to have any sensitive information on any individual. And I am an actual LLC. And we are a real entity. So let's not do this. So instead, I used it as a crutch initially to get myself to a point of it actually working on the server side. So we need to be able to publish things, reply, all these things. So I use that on my own, on like a dummy account to allow myself to publish all these things initially. Because like I'm one guy and I'm like, okay, how can I compete against these armies of individuals, right? It's very intense, right? So the way to do that is you have, something, right? You have to have like, a secret weapon. So to me, that was like my secret weapon at the time. I was able to get ahead of the curve initially. I didn't publicize that. But I mean, I used it as a learning stem, and that evolved to eventually being published to the Chrome extension store, because it's a very vetted process. They go through all the code, they do a code audit, they make sure everything's good and sophisticated. So to my surprise, when we submitted it, we got accepted like within the first 2 or 3 days. I had a buddy, he did it, and he got rejected 4 times. So like I really made sure that like everything was sophisticated. So we like made sure we removed the username and password. We like had it authenticate with threads and everything like that. So that was a long time coming for that specific aspect, because to me, security and privacy was a very important fundamental block, because I also wanted to target the European Union too.
Yeah. And at that point, I think when they made the API public, that was around when they were also exposing and expanding outside of the North America market. I'm curious then, so you get access to this unofficial API and you're just sort of building in secret with like a few folks who may have access or test. And for those who may not be on Threads, it is the social media equivalent to Twitter or X that Meta owns. And there was a community called Tech Threads that kind of got formed with a couple hundred people and got some pretty interesting notoriety in the early days of Threads. And so there was a small group of folks who stayed kind of connected for there as a core group of that. And that's really sort of some of the folks who helped you as you were going through this to really think through like, yeah, we want to be part of this. We want to help you because they also had a vested interest in understanding we want to be able to schedule posts. We want to be able to get better analytics. And so once you launched and Threads had this more expansive API that now you could get usage analytics out of it. And you could start exposing that. And I think this is the part that I really want to hone in on is now that you've bootstrapped something, you've got a good iterative process to understand the ins and outs of an unofficial API so that when the API became officially launched, now you could start evolving it. And I'm curious at what point for you, and how did you change this from really just a scheduling tool with a little bit more robust capability into like a full-fledged analytics and insights platform for how individual users could best analyze when and how to get the best engagement for their posts?
Mm-hmm. We realized that when scheduling was just one facet, and we saw ourselves as a platform that has many tools, and we truly felt that there was a disruption that needed to occur in the social media space, and that was more so on the creation. So part of that was when we were building on additional features when we're talking with individuals, and some said that they wanted to be able to handle multiple accounts. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. So I added multiple accounts, and then I'm just like listening. I'm like, okay, what else do they want? And some are wanting RSS feeds, kind of out of scope. And others want to just view how many posts they published with their Bolta account. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. So that led me to creating like a contribution graph. So think of like the GitHub contribution graph where you have all of these little blocks, all these little blocks. And some of them are like shaded, some of them are not shaded. Like, so I basically built like thank you. Yes. So heat map. And yeah, so I basically built that in pure CSS. God. And that was basically showing what the individual posted with Bolta as well as on Threads. So it showed like their streak. Like you don't want to lose a purple block. You want to keep the purple block alive. So that's pretty much what it showed. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I guess to dig in though, when you're integrating in with this API and now you're looking at the usage analytics by the user and comparing that to like their utilization of Bolta, there's a lot of different data elements that you have to bring in. is that just something that's happening dynamically because Threads has provided a pretty robust API? Are you storing any of that data locally to your server or wherever this is getting hosted in the cloud, rather, in order to provide like those analytics? Because I can imagine there might be certain times that API is like robust or it gets hit too much, particularly as more people build on it. I'm sure it was not a perfect API when it first launched. And so I'm curious, like, how did you go through the thought of like actually staging what data you were getting and then, presenting it in a heat map, but then like other various ways of like the recommendations that you end up making later that we'll talk about. But again, like the data element that you're bringing in a lot of subsets of data that for an individual account to be able to build this data layer for the end user.
So originally for the recent posts, we were using it directly with the Threads API, and we've noticed that there was a bit of like a latency, and it would take from some users 5 seconds to like 30 seconds because it depends on the frequency of the posts. And we said, you know what, let's take these posts, let's store them on Volta, and then we can just pull that. So it would pull it from recents, and that was more so allowing users to quickly get it for a better UX experience. And in terms of like insights, we wanted to over time get like a lot of the users' posts and eventually have like a digital clone of them in a way that it imitates to the writing style, as well as it is able to know the best time to post for them. So when I say digital clone, it's you think like, okay, like a one-to-one digital twin, but it's more so like it understands your writing format. It knows like that, like when you posted, your views, your metrics. So we do have the post information for the views, the likes, all that information. So right now we're just collecting that, and we do have plans to do some machine learning with that and really train that data to solve the question, what is the optimal time? Not just like 11, but like that exact time for that specific person to get that kind of engagement. And like, let's say I'm having sort of like a brain funk. What are some like good suggestions for posts? Sure, you could do generic posts, but like I want it in my voice and like I want it in my style, right? So it's sort of like is coming to that, but we have to also.
Is this like an integration with an LLM then to let help you craft?
Yes. Okay. So we do have existing, but it's more generic, and we have trained one already internally off of my posts, and it is like sort of like a digital clone, and we long-term want to provide that for every user. And we don't want to have it like an autopilot, like you just click or blah, click or blah. We don't want that. We want it to be a co-pilot where we assist individuals to have them with their brand, with their voice online. So if someone wants to really engage and like say, hello world, they're able to do that, and they have that little crutch. So that to me, like we're sort of like helping them, sort of like how Grammarly helps individuals with various languages, with grammar and spelling, etc. We want to help individuals with being authentic. So that is to us is how gathering some of these insights will help us with being more authentic without really thinking of like the what ifs, etc. So like if you think of like the Ray-Ban Metas, right? Imagine there's like an SDK that they open source, and you're like, okay, hey Meta, like I just had a wonderful walk in the park with my dog, and it talks to Volta server. Volta server is able to extract that speech, convert to text, take the text, and it uses your word styling to then make a Volta draft. And the next time you're on Volta AI, you can then see it. and then you can approve it. When you approve it, it gets scheduled, and then it goes to the optimal time to schedule. So in a way, it's authentic. That's sort of the approach that we're thinking long-term for that specific thing.
Got it. So I want to summarize this for listeners specifically, because we covered a lot. So you started with obviously a scheduler. You got an official API that allowed you to take what you took from this unofficial API, building in secret, essentially, and really publish something really quickly, like days. I think it was days after the official API launch that you had said, hey, here's Bolta to the world. And then quickly after, utilizing the information that you got out of this API, you can now start tying an individual user's account to their entire history of posts on threads and exposing that level of data to the end user. I want to click in real quick on that piece of like, how did you determine what was useful for a user to see? Like, what was that process for you? Because obviously you had information you wanted to see, but then also you're not just building for yourself at this point. You're building a public product once it was launched. And so how did you engage with folks to get feedback on what was going to be useful for them to see?
Right. So it came down to just talking with our original users. So we have this community called Boltafam, and we would share updates there, and we would do one-on-ones with individuals within that, as well as posting on our Bolta.ai threads account, and we would just share updates, building in public. And we would get a lot of great replies, some, negative. Like one thing that we made was like the AI replies, and we got a lot of backlash from that. And we realized, okay, we got to be a little bit more careful with our words. So we adjusted some of the text. Instead of the AI replies, we called it suggestions. So it's more of like helping you with a suggestion. So same thing, but just a suggestion. So instead of, once you click on it, it had the word copy on the AI reply. We replaced that with the word done. So it's all about, words too on the app as well, because that can give negative connotations. So like a lot of,
and I think here, maybe to guide the question a little bit further is like, you got a lot of feedback from a lot of different people, particularly when you were making a lot of public posts. So I'm curious, how did you determine which feedback was valuable, which feedback was like, maybe they just don't get what we're building and it's not aligned with like where you're after, and then which feedback was just unhelpful? Because I think one of the things from product management, particularly when you're engaging users, is the discernment to know what feedback is useful as opposed to what feedback isn't. And when you're building a data product, particularly with people who don't know, I think, in a lot of circumstances for a public application, necessarily how data works, because there's a lot of people out there that don't. How do you filter through the noise? Because you've got a lot of noise. Now, granted, you had, like you said, a close-knit group of people who were kind of techie and could help with that, but then you also had a smattering of public comments. How do you sift through that noise to determine the right thing to build?
Yes. So that led me to building a feature requests. So I'm like, you have an idea? Great. Submit a feature request. Like submit it. So I said, okay, cool. Submit a feature request. And if people upvote it, like if you get people to upvote it, I'll build it. So that's pretty much right. What was like my de facto. And,
so some crowdsourcing of like popular.
Right. So like one such thing was people that wanted to use the hashtag on text wanted to have their hashtag be blue, like a blue word, similar to threads. So I'm like, okay, I think that's very silly, but I am not the user. These people want that. So I'm like, okay, let's build it. Let's see if people want it. And people did want that. So basically when a user types in the hashtag symbol or the pound for the old folks that are listening, basically it creates a blue word. And that's basically what Threads has for that. It's they're called tags. So that allows that blue word to transform into, like a search query. But this was more of a UI thing, not more so like a server thing, which is a small micro UI thing. So in terms of like what to build, I've noticed that individuals, they really wanted to just post very quickly. And I'm like, okay, how can I do that very quickly? And it just came down to some of the buttons as well. So originally with the rows of posts, we never had the dots for each one, being able to edit, publish, reschedule. So listening to some of the users, they're like, okay, I want to be able to publish quickly. I want to be able to reschedule quickly. And I'm like, okay, let's do this. And some individuals are like, I want to be able to reschedule it quickly. Even within it, I want to be able to edit it or delete a media. And I want to be able to like drag and drop a media object within it. So those are some of the things that these individuals are saying. And I'm like, let's see how that looks. When I was weighing it out, and I was thinking more so from a UX standpoint, right? Like, how can it be so intuitive and just feel as frictionless? Because I want to be as accessible as possible. I don't want to have all that noise like Buffer or Hootsuite where it's just like a bunch of words. I want to do my only purpose in life, and I just want to schedule a thread or publish a post, like whatever. Like,
yeah. And then I guess, one of the things that I think happens often in product management specifically is this complex scheme of prioritization, right? You're going to get a bunch of requests. And in your case, you crowdsource the request and add kind of a crowdsourcing of that was your prioritization scheme. Were there instances, though, that you found that, this may be voted up high, but it seems like, is that really the important thing to build? Like, is this really what's going to be useful for a lot of people? Like, did you ever run that? Or did you kind of just say, I'm going to build for the people right now, and I might think one thing, but this is what my users are telling me? Because there's product managers who are sometimes really stubborn, and they're going to say, no, even though my user says this is what they want, I'm still going to build X, Y, and Z. And sometimes they're right on money, and sometimes they get it real wrong. And they have an ego and they go about their instincts. So I'm curious, like, did you have a scheme? Did you just go through like with what your users said they wanted? Or did you have some third way?
Right. So I sort of went with like my gut intuition, like what I felt was the right thing. Like I focused more on like, what do we need now? Like, I put my customer support hat on, and like, if I'm handling the issues that may arise, I'm like, okay, how can I help you? Like, you're going through a little drive-through, right? Try to like figure out like, okay. So I would like wear different hats, and sometimes, it might blend in with the technical side or the design side or, the finance side. Like, okay, I can see if I can do that. And sometimes it all blends in together. And you have to know where to put a stop on certain things. Like one was like dark mode. Like, do we need dark mode now? No, we don't. As much as it's amazing, we don't need dark mode. We got to focus on functionality and getting something actually useful, because dark mode is not useful. It's just
insanity.
Yes.
I would tell you this is something that product management suffers with. I think the knowing of when to put a stop on something. Mm-hmm. A lot of product managers, a lot of companies get that.
Right.
Or they're so distracted because they've got too many initiatives, they put a stop on too many things too quickly, and they don't build out fully fledged products. If you've ever, you've done some consulting in your time, and I am sure you have experienced instances where you have had to work with a company's internal tools that felt half-baked.
Yes.
And it's very frustrating.
It is.
And so figuring out that nice delicate balance of like how much is too much, how much is gold plating, and what is necessary to meet the needs of the users. And in this case, you've really, for those who have never really engaged in like a social media platform and you wanted to create content, I think one of the things that's really important in understanding that is, to your point, having usage analytics about your performance of your information and what you're posting and creating and out there, and getting that back to you for you to understand what are people engaging with. Like that's the data we're talking about here, is how do I take engagement data for content that I post to social media and reflect that in a way that makes sense to a user who may not really understand a lot about data, but they can understand like a heat map. Oh, this post or this type of content or these keywords are really useful at increasing my engagement, especially for those folks who may be trying to monetize on a platform. And I think that's really important for what Bolta is doing, based on what I'm hearing, is the ability to share that kind of analytics and performance data that Meta doesn't really provide you robust capabilities to do. At least with what they share, it was from what I've seen versus what I've experienced from Bolta. And I'm curious, if you put on sort of the hat of the content creator as maybe one of your core use cases that you've really built a solution for, is, are you finding that folks who are using the platform are utilizing what, and I'm not certain what data you're capturing as far as usage analytics in Bolta, but I'm curious, like, are you finding any trends among your users that you're seeing maybe on some of the data you do capture, their usage and engagement metrics are increasing through the use of Bolta? Like, what does success look like for your users in using Bolta that you measure to know, like, yeah, there's a reason people are using this?
It comes down to thinking about like who our user is. So we have some power users that like to plan ahead many months in advance, where they just want to plan their entire calendar and just say, forget about it. Like just forget it, right? So those individuals, I like them. They just keep it simple. They just schedule everything, do, done. Those individuals are great. And then there's individuals that actively use it. Like they do a week by week play. And some of those individuals, they have multiple accounts. And those individuals, I would say they might be journalists or micro influencers or individuals that have a brand and they just are doing their either their weekly or their monthly scheduling for it, and they get all the data, the information there. And then another surprising trend or pattern that we've noticed was an individual that wanted to add not a couple accounts, but 500 plus accounts. And I'm just thinking, like, what? Maybe. So, I was intrigued, and this individual, they said, how many accounts can you do, right? And I'm like, as many as you want. He's like, can you handle 300 to 500 accounts? I'm like, let me check. So I talked with my business partner, Lucia. She and I we're like, okay, we got to hop on a call with them to see what they're about. Long story short, they have an agency and they handle a lot of accounts for businesses, and they're out in Eastern Europe, Latvia, which I'm like, wow, that's quite far. And I'm thinking, okay, cool. Let's see what they got going on. So, I simply listened. I'm like, okay, what can you do? Right. So they were actively on the hunt, looking for a product that was able to offer like auto replies, auto publishing for threads. And I'm like laughing in my head. I'm like, good luck, because there's nothing available like that right now. And I'm just thinking, like, here's what I can do. I can do you one better. We have a platform that's free, and you can download the extension. It's free. I was emphasizing it's free, and you're able to manually, reply back with, the suggestions, and they love that. But then they're like, we want to be able to do that, but on a bigger scale. But we want to also have that within the web app. I'm like, okay, sounds good. And I'm just like thinking of all the numbers, right? Like that's easily a client that could pay, that could charge 10,000 or, silly money, monopoly money, right? And I'm just thinking like, that's a lot on the server. So, a product side's like, yeah, I got to prioritize that. But at the same time, engineering side, you have to build the functionality before you offer anything. So I took back. I'm like, I am not about to do a bot farm. I'm not about to do any of that. I first want to focus on engineering. But I said, you know what? I'm going to invite you to join Bolta, and you can join our premium, and you'll get access to, up to 10 accounts. That's what I told them. So they were super excited about that. Eric's testing it, and the feedback was they loved it. And this user, this individual, he has an agency, and he's like, okay, when are you launching the web app? And I'm like, December 1st. So I'm like, okay. So he's like letting me know, like, okay, I want to have an agency. I want to be able to handle different user permissions so I can manage different accounts, and I can set visibility. And I'm just thinking like, that's a lot of, that's a big ask, right? So when it comes to looking at insights, it just comes down to just talking with someone, really asking them questions, and really getting down to the core of what their problem is, and just listening. So like, had I assumed that I didn't have it, they would not be using Bolter right now. But I kept asking questions like, why do you want to use it, right? And they're mentioning the replies. So I mentioned we already do have that. So uncovering different areas allowed us to, find little needles in a haystack, so to speak.
Yeah. And then I guess when we think of then, like, you've got now this bulk user, you've got folks who sort of just schedule long in advance. And like, I'm assuming if they're going to schedule long in advance, their content's not changing a lot. And then you've got people who are managing week over week, probably also responding to sort of whatever the zeitgeist is of that moment. I'm curious, how does Bolta's sort of internal metrics, because you track some things that your users are doing, how do you measure user success, right? Like, any product needs to understand, what does it mean for their users to be successful? Which I'm a big fan of, like the jobs to be done framework. So understanding how to measure what job the user wants to do. But when it comes to something like, it feels very apparent, like, oh, I just want to schedule posts, but like, there is certain things that you want to measure the user's engagement by. Like, are you measuring things like how often the user is using Bolta to schedule posts, and how many posts the average person, like, what's your success metrics for Bolta's users, and how you know that you're building the right product?
So our like KPI, our North Star metric to us is the amount of bolts that a user is able to publish. Like, it's more so like the frequency, like getting the user publish more for us is key. So like the amount that they're publishing, as well as the time to publish. So if you look at like Hinge, the dating app, they're all about getting the user off the platform to meet the goal of dating. So one of our metrics for that is like getting them to get off the platform ASAP so they can get back to whatever they were doing before. So it's about context switching. So we want to focus more on getting them off the Bolta extension with the goal. So like, let's say they write a post very quickly or whatever, they're able to click schedule, and they do that, and we see like a decline on that user over time, like 5 minutes to 4 minutes. Like to us, that is a good success metric, as that is one of the goals where we want to get users back to doing what they love.
Living their life.
Exactly.
And also getting engagement and getting engagement on their posts. I think that's really fascinating. The fact that like you've taken I think this bespoke frustration you had, you turned it into an application. You talked a lot about the details of sort of the experience that you went through. And I think that's really helpful for folks who've never been in this. It's a little sort of data product adjacent because it truly is a consumer grade app. There are lots of consumer grade data products, but this is a little bit more on offering solutions to a social media platform that was relatively new at the time. And then you really added sort of insight analytics to it. And then you took sort of an LLM model, ingested a user's post to like train the LLM model on how to give, as you put it, suggestions on what to post in that user's voice, so that it would sound authentic to them. And then also provided, here's the time that your posts tend to, based on your current followers, get engagement, as well as like maybe bespoke folk. And like, I think a lot of folks have never thought through or heard someone talk through the process that it goes through to take that from inception of an idea to like really bootstrapping and deploying it. And so one, I'll commend you on that. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm curious then, if you have like any other sort of tips and tricks that you would share of like outside of sort of these technical, really sort of tactical details of like, how do you turn a personal annoyance into a successful product? Like what tips do you do? Like, because I'm not a builder. I'm someone who understands data and I understand product management and I understand users, but like I'm not someone who I've got this problem when I go build some bespoke solution. I'm like the improver, the innovator of I'm really frustrated by this already broken system, but there is a system in place. Let me optimize it. How do you build something bespoke?
So
you've shared a lot of it, but like just the tips, like what are the helpful things that you would share for folks?
So I think about my own problems and I work towards solving them. And I'm like, and I also think like of these problems, what can I automate? What can I like get down to zero so I can get more time? So one problem is I spend a lot of time thinking what I'm going to wear, right? Like I remember thinking back in high school, I would spend like 20, 30 minutes getting dressed, changing clothes, changing out. Like, I'm like, geez, like, oh my God, like, why? So I'm like, okay, now like fast forward many years, I'm like, geez, how, like, what I spent my time doing that. And like, it's gone down a little bit, a couple of minutes, but I'm like, okay, how can I remove that decision out of my life to, be less of, so I can use my decision power on something more critical. So for example, with clothes, I can just use all solid colors and solid, shorts, like all black t-shirts. And that's what I did. I bought all black t-shirts and I just bought the same shorts. And I spent like $300 on that. And they're like very high quality. I just wore that pretty much every day. And I still do. And I do that, day to day. So it's one less thinking power. So now I can get more time back. So I just bought myself, in a way, more time to focus on other things. So like for date night, for example, I would not spend the energy wearing the black shirt. I would of course wear something different, right? But another example, another problem, right? Let's say getting out of the bed. So, you're very groggy. How can you make your life hell getting out of the bed? You get a Nest thermostat. You automate it with Alexa or some device, and you raise the heck out of the temperature in your apartment.
I do that so that I'm sweltering when I wake. It's annoying.
So
yeah, I'm like, I get these covers off me, and also all my lights turn on at the same. I get it. Yeah, I've automated my life in that regard. Yeah. So I mean, really, and I think this is true for a lot of like founders, people who are building small scale solutions that end up growing into sort of these fascinating mature products. Is like they started with an annoyance, and they just were really relentless about solving it. I think that if you haven't read it, Barry Schwartz's The Paradox of Choice, that talks about how stifled by choice we can sometimes get, that some choice is good, too much choice is really paralyzing. I'll recommend it to anyone. It changed me as a product manager as well, because I would just say, I don't care about all these choices. I need to streamline how many choices that I have presented of what I can build. And it really changed for how I build data products too, of like, I don't need all the data. I need some of the data. I need an option of what to choose for it. And there's a lot of people who think about, I need everything. No one needs everything. It goes back to the theory of restraint I'm working through. That said, as we wrap up, this is the last question I love to ask folks, which is, we all make mistakes. Some of them are big. Some of them really change our careers. I'm curious, in all of your experience that you've had building products, scaling solutions, consulting, what's a mistake that you've made that you've really learned from?
Yeah, I would say marketing first, then building, and then selling it. So the lesson learned here was don't market it and then build and then sell. Aim for tying pre-sales with the marketing to validate the opportunity and then build it. Don't wait to sell after you have built it.
That's so succinct and so good. There's so many sales-led organizations that I think a lot of our audience, particularly product managers, work with, that will sell something that they haven't yet built, and then they have to scramble to go build what sales told them to build and promised a client or customer. That is a common thing. It's very, it happens all the time. And so I appreciate you sharing that. I think it is undervalued at how important it is to understand what needs to be built, building a prototype and selling that and enhancing it on over time. And I think the other thing that's really important that what you've done and talked about is the building in partnership with your user base. There's so much that you get, particularly in products, whether you're building sort of, consumer grade service, data products, the sort of messy mirror of both is sitting down with your user, understanding their needs and problems, and building in tandem with them, giving you real-time feedback. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson that I think I continue to forget. Particularly as I've gotten a lot of experience in this. And I think a lot of experienced product managers, we have good instincts, but we sometimes will not have the time or capacity or forget how important it is to build in partnership with our users. And so I think that's really, really important that you've shared just how thoughtful and involved it was to get that feedback. Max, I want to thank you so much for spending almost an hour with me today. It has been a pleasure. Folks can find you and learn more about Bolta at bolta.ai. They can, we'll share in the show notes your LinkedIn. But thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your vacation, for sitting down and chatting with me today.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening. Hopefully you got some great actionable insights out of this episode. We're so excited to dig deeper into data product management and its many facets. If you want to engage more with the show, you can follow us on LinkedIn and check out Soda's website at soda.io for more related content around product management in data. And if you are a practitioner bringing product management practices to data and want to potentially be a guest, please check the show notes for a link to apply. And as always, we strongly encourage people from underrepresented groups in tech to apply. Much as I'm a handsome devil, we don't want all our guests only looking like me. So again, let's get excited for more digging into data product management in action.